Welcome to CSM 2022, and more specifically, our session entitled The Value of Post-Professional Residency, Fellowship, and PhD Training. This session's speakers include Michael Beatty and Jennifer Stevens Lapsley, both from the University of Colorado, and myself, Carol Tucker, who is at the University of Texas Medical Branch. We have no relevant financial relationships to disclose or any other conflicts of interest with this session. The learning objectives for this session include allowing the participants to describe the advantages of post-professional education, to really focus on the key differences both in the programs themselves as well as outcomes between residencies, fellowship, and PhD programs. To think about ways you can strategize to make your application more competitive, as well as to find the right mentor for your post-professional education. And also to learn how to articulate the key questions that you should ask, trying to match your needs and interests with the programs that you're looking at. We'll spend about 15 minutes doing this introduction and really framing what I feel super passionate about, which is the value, the critical value of research training in the post-professional career. We'll spend time talking about PhD and research training pathways and some of the new analysis we've done looking at the role of financial concerns in doing a PhD. Always the third section, which is always the most enlightening, at least for me who's a researcher, is the residency and fellowship pathways. We have plenty of time for an interactive discussion, and we look to your feedback no matter how you want to get it to us. References are included. And so I'm going to lead with the first part. I'm Carol Tucker. I'm currently at the University of Texas Medical Branch. I'm the Associate Dean for Research for the School of Health Professions, as well as a professor in the Nutrition, Metabolic, and Rehabilitation Sciences Department. I want to talk a little bit about why research training matters. And this is a session we've done for a couple of years now. And every year, the critical value of research to our profession seems to grow, at least in my mind. And hopefully I can impart a little bit of my enthusiasm and critical value of research to our profession in this short time I have with you. So 3 things that you need to remember, if nothing else, after this session is we as a profession need to continuously update our evidence, the evidence that physical therapy has a role in health, both at the person level, at the community level, at the population level, whether it's direct intervention, whether it's advocacy, that we need to update the evidence. We need to revisit the data, the quality of the data, the heterogeneity of the data, and the knowledge that we generate from a variety of sources to move our profession forward. We need to be actively involved in doing this every single day. We need to engage, inform, and do physical therapy research. Chances are high that our colleagues in other professions are doing research that also values their professions maybe as their primary goal. We as physical therapists really need to look at the rehabilitation and the physical therapy evidence that's out there. And then finally, our continued growth as a science-based profession requires a cohort of rigorously, and this means beyond entry level, trained researchers. When we look at the APTA and the revised, although it's a couple of years old, vision and mission, it's about transforming society by optimizing movement to improve human experience. Our research efforts, our scholarship efforts, certainly are focused and support in this area. We also are building a community that advances the profession of physical therapy to improve the health of society. And so, along with both of those kind of retooled vision and missions in the last few years, in 2022, there's a very comprehensive and thoughtful review of the physical therapy research agenda that will be forthcoming. So keep your eyes open for that. When we look at the evidence base for physical therapy, it doesn't come just from what you may think of as classical clinical trials research. There's certainly that clinical research looking at the impact of perhaps an intervention on movement of a population that's healthier with the disease. But there's also basic science research, so things that may be at the tissue, the cellular, the genetic level that we're involved with. Epidemiology, moving in and looking at those forms of advocacy policy of disease clusters that impact populations, so very large samples, if you will, and all the techniques that go with that. We also focus highly on health services research and policy, maybe looking at um, how we could better deliver care or provide accessible care to those that may be less fortunate or have the hardest time or are underserved. Part of our research also includes measurement, development, and validation. How do we detect those changes based on our interventions or our exposures that we provide as physical therapists? Clearly, within research, there's also education and professional development. And I took this figure to actually think a little bit more about our academic endeavors, not research, but there is certainly value of research looking at how we educate and do professional development. So all of these lines of research are possible for a physical therapist to be engaged in. And all of these should interact with the patients or the clients we serve and at that community level and at that population. And so this figure is, as you can see, from a evidence for research, and it is available at the APTA website. So when we think about evidence-based practice, it's not just one of these, it's all of these. And many of the concerns and barriers that we have to using evidence-based practice within our day-to-day activities revolve around also finding and applying evidence. And this is why it's important that we have rigorously research-trained physical therapists and rehab scientists that know how to not only generate, but also how to disseminate the knowledge in ways that we can find and easily apply it to our clinical situations or our population-based physical therapy challenges. So again, research-trained physical therapists, and this means research training beyond the entry level, supports the growth and advancement of science within our field. We're going to be using some terminology today. A doctoral degree is certainly a DPT, and that's considered an entry-level degree, but a doctoral degree that is oriented toward preparing students to make original intellectual contributions in a field of study, and it's not primarily intended for the practice of a profession. So yes, as our profession has moved from bachelor's level, entry level practice training to master's to doctoral, we have DPTs. And as we talk about a doctoral degree or a terminal degree, we really mean things like a PhD, an SCD or an EDD, and we'll use all of those. They have slightly different historical perspectives about why those degrees exist, but all of those are considered terminal degrees. A postdoc researcher, or sometimes called a postdoc, is a person professionally conducting research after the completion of their research doctoral studies. So typically postdocs are 2, maybe more years. And again, this postdoc is a time of intensive engagement in research. That is their job during this time frame. And I bring up both of these to contrast with, again, think about a DPT degree where you certainly learned about evidence-based practice and you certainly get enough clinical exposure. But a doctoral degree, a terminal doctoral degree, is really focused on building out your research skills. And a postdoc researchers, imagine 40 plus hours a week, every week for a year or two, really generating knowledge and learning how to generate knowledge. So very intensive experiences. Taking a step back and maybe a little bit of a different focus, when we look at PT education programs, which is where a lot of our doctorally trained research tends to sit, we have 256 accredited programs, and these numbers may be a year old, and Lord knows COVID certainly has had a big effect on all of us. But we have about or just under 300 entry-level DPT programs with about 11,000 DPT grads a year here in the US. So here, since 2018, we have about a quarter million PTs in the US, and that's compared to almost a million MDs that are graduated. So again, we're fewer in number. There's core faculty positions of about 2,400 in the US, with a good number of those vacant. And when we look at the tasks, what's on a plate of a core faculty person, you can see that a lot of it is teaching, some service, some clinical practice administration, but about a quarter of the time is meant to be spent in scholarship. And again, we're focusing on the value of research and the value of scholarship to the profession. When we look at residency and fellowship programs, there's about 300 programs, and if we assume they each graduate around 3 a year, that gives us about 900 residency or fellowship trained individuals. And again, the numbers are meant to give you kind of a proportion of understanding those that are tasked with doing research in the profession versus raw numbers. Research doctoral, PhD, SCD, or EDD programs that have a good number of physical therapy, either as students or as a focus. There are about 40 programs. And if we similarly assume they graduate about 3 a year, that means each year there are about 120 graduates of research-really doctorally trained physical therapists. So that's, again, a little bit lower in number, and carrying probably a big load in terms of advancing the profession within the research programs. When we look at DPT programs that are at research universities, so again, universities that have that PT program nestled in with maybe clinical translation science centers or a research infrastructure around grants admin. You see about 35% of our programs, and again, are at high research activity universities, whereas about 65% of our programs tend to be at non-research intensive universities. When we look at the growth in each of these two areas, so, and again, a little bit of this is assuming that the high research universities tend to have the PhD programs, and those are the ones that are going to be able to provide this rigorous research training. They've only grown by about 3 over the course of time, whereas the PT programs and the faculty and the students that are nestled in it have grown by 24 over that same time span. So we're seeing larger growth in physical therapy programs at less research intensive universities. Just something to think about. When we look at the tenure status of the core DPT faculty, we know that CAPT requires that 50% of the core faculty have a terminal doctoral degree. You can see that it's kind of split between those that are PhD or other DSCs, EDDs, so about 60% or so, and that 47% are clinical specialists. So faculties tend to have a balance of research trained individuals as well as more clinically trained individuals. DPT faculty scholarship, again, when we talk about generating evidence, the evidence can only be put into practice if it's disseminated, and that's why we do focus on publications. And so if we look at the core faculty positions, and again, these are just approximate numbers, so you can play some of these head games with me, about 1,400 of those have these terminal degrees. And when we look at the productivity, and again, these are from some of the CAPT program data, although there's 2.5 million peer-reviewed articles in PubMed, PTs generate a little over 3,000. of those. And so again, doctors per year are being produced at a higher rate than PTs. There's certainly other professions that are doctorally trained, but we are generating about 3,000 pieces of new knowledge within our field. And so when we look at the mean per program, means about programs are putting out about 12 and maybe some books or other articles that are accepted. We certainly are good at doing presentations and getting knowledge out from that, but perhaps turning some of that presentation level data into publications that may be read by people outside of our profession more than the presentations is a gap that we could be addressing. When we look at core faculty scholarships and grant, and again, if you think back to those 1,400 that have PhD degrees, there is a move now within some of our more rigorous external funding federal agencies like NIH to allow individuals with a DPT to apply for grants. Some are very competitive in comparison to their PhD colleagues submitting, but for the most part, most NIH grants are received by people with a terminal research degree or training. So the total number of core faculty with grant funding is 800. So again, about 30%. Total amount of the funding from NIH is running at about 456. I have to always do the math million. And so again, you can see there's a number of core faculty who submitted but aren't quite funded yet, and that's a fairly large number. And so there's room to improve our grantsmanship within here. So again, per program, you can see that PTs certainly are writing grants. We are getting funding, but we could possibly be more competitive when we look at the total budget available to NIH from NIH to what we could be pulling in to do rehab research specific to physical therapy. So again, the NIH budget was $42 billion, and we have about $457 million going to PT core faculty. And in 2018, there's about 149 projects that specifically labeled themselves as rehabilitation focused. So you can see that as PTs, there's certainly room for PTs to become better funded within NIH alone. And this is just a breakdown in terms of the number of projects that had a physical therapist as a PI or an MPI, and then the total amount of money that became available. The research intensive program in physical therapy, which is an ACAPT organization, did a survey in 2017, and there were a few things that came out of that survey that I think still stand true. And the first is that there is clear evidence that there's a shortage of faculty prepared to conduct original research. If you look at how much more funding NIH proportionally could be giving to physical therapists, you can see that there. If you look at the number of publications that we put out, there's certainly room for us to improve there. And part of the reason why there's this shortage of faculty prepared, it's not because we don't have PhD programs or rigorous ones. The overall capacity of the current system we have to train PhDs seems sufficient, though funding of PhDs remain a challenge, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. PT's post-clinical experience returning for a PhD, PT new graduates entering immediately into PhD, and dual degree DPT and PhD programs. All of these are kind of three pathways in which people can move, and there are pros and cons to each. Sometimes going into the clinic makes it harder to come back and do a PhD. And so those new grads that enter immediately sometimes tend to keep that school habits in place. But all three pathways and programs do admit people from these three pathways. Research doctoral programs do face recruitment difficulties of more experienced clinicians to return to research doctoral programs, but almost all of the programs that answered this survey feel their PhD graduates could succeed in research-intensive universities after a PhD, and all of them do also encourage that extra period of time of postdoc training. So when I kind of lay out post-professional pathways, and if we move from the bottom, which is kind of that DPT entry level, so down here, into what really could be called generating professional wisdom and advancement, we move up with structure and time investment needed by the individual. So entry level PT is our starting point. If you would want to do something research focused, you could do university certificate programs. So typically only a couple of credits, maybe 12, can be completed in a short amount of time. These could be coupled with a master's program in which there's more time and investment made. What's really going to lead towards evidence generation, again, is that PhD and postdoc. And these do tend to have the most structure and also time investment. DPT entry level clearly get clinical experience, advanced clinical training, and continuing education. I don't want to downplay the importance of us as a profession continuing to do that. And then if you wanted to advance your clinical skills, we see advanced clinical certifications. And these are often coupled with or one may precede the other, residency and fellowship programs. So there's a lot of different pathways in PT. And what I am proposing is that there's plenty of room for physical therapists to follow a more research-focused pathway, and that at some level, this has equal value and maybe more value at really coming up and generating evidence specific to physical therapy and really advancing our wisdom as a profession. So what's next? And this is really where I want us to think a little bit philosophically. In 10 years, what will be the evidence base for our profession if we have proportionally fewer people choosing to do doctoral research training? Where does that leave our evidence? Does it start to lag behind as we have fewer people producing it? And if that happens, or even if it doesn't, who will be deciding what evidence our profession needs? As we see our colleagues in athletic training, or maybe chiropractic or PM&R moving and advancing their fields to doctoral trained, I should put OTs in there too. Who's going to be deciding what evidence our profession needs when we look at is an athletic trainer perhaps more or better or equal to providing an intervention than a PT? And we need to be involved in all forms of research, but also those that may get covered up by some of our other colleagues. Who will be prepared to generate our evidence? Hopefully it will be physical therapists. Can we provide meaningful opportunities between a DPT and a PhD? So for those individuals that maybe don't want to commit but could do a master's, or maybe there has been some talk about doing a DPT to a research intensive experience without a PhD. What are the challenges and what other pathways are there? For all of you, though, I want you to really think about what your path is and when will you start. I became an entry-level physical therapist and then moved into engineering. And I know for me, I spent a little bit of time saying, well, maybe next semester I'll start. Starting a PhD program sometimes can be as simple as taking a stats course and getting back out in the field of research. And so don't let the, once you start, you won't be able to get off that train scare you. I would encourage you to start looking and listen to the other talks and really think about how you can get yourself going. So again, 3 things. We need to continuously update our evidence. It's not going to appear on its own, and our other colleagues are going to be working hard on generating evidence that supports their fields. We need to engage, inform, and do physical therapy research. And if it's not you, And those of us that are aging are going to retire who will be doing physical therapy research. And we really need to have all of us think about how we can constructively move beyond entry level practice. And again, whether it's more clinical advanced training, whether it's just a pathway of continuing education and building up your individual portfolio, or whether it's a matter of doing a PhD, you can make a change and you can start doing that as soon as tomorrow. So thank you for listening. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues.
My name is Jennifer Stevens-Lapsley, and I'm going to be highlighting the value of PhD training. I'm a professor at the University of Colorado and the director of the Rehabilitation Science PhD program. We'll take questions at the end, but my contact information is listed here. You're welcome to reach out to me with any questions as you explore options. So how do residency and fellowship programs differ from PhD training? Well, Mike will go into this in more detail, but residency and fellowship programs allow for greater clinical expertise and specialization. And PhD programs allow for more rigorous training in clinical research designed to advance clinical practice in the rehab profession. You really have to ask yourself, what are your goals? Are your goals residency or fellowship based, and your direction is to be more involved in management or clinical roles? Or do you want to be a clinical expert and really specialize? Or are you interested in contributing to the evidence that's available on the level of case studies on individual patients? Or are you interested maybe in being a professor or a clinical instructor in academia that has the opportunity to change and advance clinical practice on a much larger scale while sacrificing that individual one-on-one day-to-day patient interaction? Are you interested in conducting large-scale funded clinical research on population and health systems levels? Then maybe a PhD is right for you. When I mentioned getting a PhD to individuals, there are a number of considerations and concerns that are voiced. One of those is financial. Many individuals understandably don't want to incur additional debt by going back to school and getting a PhD. So I'm going to talk about this in a bit more detail. But the other consideration is fatigue from being in school for so many years, and that is certainly a very important consideration. Sometimes taking a break between DPT education and PhD program training is a way to balance this out and get a little bit more distance from being in the classroom for such an extended period of time. That being said, I'll talk a little bit more about things to look for in PhD programs. And if you do experience classroom fatigue, maybe looking for a program that really has a shorter duration classroom component could be the solution to minimizing some of the classroom fatigue. For example, our rehab sciences program at the University of Colorado, most students really only have a year and a half of coursework, and that coursework is very part-time, and the remainder of the time is spent in very practical, applied learning settings. Another consideration is that students want to specialize and get hands-on experience early after graduation. And that's an important factor in your decision as to whether you should go back and get a PhD immediately or wait and have some clinical work. But you can certainly find ways in which to integrate clinical practice with PhD training such that you're still interacting with patients while you're training. Many students that work with me during their PhD training period lead clinical studies where they're working side by side with therapists in the community, or they're treating patients themselves one-on-one. And then, of course, people certainly strive for balance in their lives. And it is possible to have balance while getting a PhD. I think one of the things that I love most about my job is that work doesn't often feel like work. Much of the time, I'm enjoying my responsibilities and opportunities so much that this inherently creates a little bit more balance and allows me to really truly engage in what I'm doing in a meaningful way. An important consideration is whether or not you're going to have a job at the end of your PhD training. The good news is there's a growing need for PT faculty across the country, and the need is expected to continue to increase. I have not seen any PT PhD trained individuals have any difficulty securing faculty positions. So there's a wide open job market in the near future. Furthermore, This is important to consider in contrast to other disciplines. For example, exercise science has a much more competitive job market, so it's much more difficult to secure a faculty position following the conclusion of PhD training. But in the PT arena, there really are many opportunities for faculty positions. So when you look at the number of faculty that have PhDs or EDDs or other post-professional degrees, you see that the large majority are PhDs. It's also important to mention that when we're considering DPTs that apply for a position versus a PhD that applies for a position, we looked at an analysis in our program where we had an 8-fold increase in applicants for a PT position that didn't require a PhD compared to a position that was a research track position that required a PhD. So when you don't have a PhD and you want to secure an academic position, it's much more competitive overall. So what does a professor do? Well, there are many different combinations of responsibilities that make this job so rewarding. And every individual wears a different hat with different proportions of each of these elements. Some of us are involved in research as our primary responsibility, and many of us are involved in teaching as a primary responsibility, along with clinical and service activities for most everyone. And service is one of the critical foundational pillars of academia, where everyone is expected to provide service to the clinical community and the profession as a whole. The other pillars can be interchanged in different proportions and combinations depending on your interests, your background, and your goals. So there's a lot of opportunities to continue to grow and change and discover new areas of opportunity in academic settings. I spoke briefly about the financial considerations. And one of the first things that most people indicate to me is that they don't want to incur additional debt. And that's very understandable. Most programs do pay students a stipend to participate in PhD training. This stipend typically ranges from $25,000 to $35,000 per year, depending on the program. For example, our Rehab Science program at the University of Colorado has a $34,000 per year stipend. Full-time programs such as ours often pay your tuition as well as your health insurance. If you choose to go on to receive additional training, which is not necessary but is an option for many individuals who really want to pursue a career in research, 2 additional years of postdoctoral training result in higher stipend plus health insurance. So the data on financial benefits that I'm about to share with you is based on a number of assumptions laid out here. One of the biggest assumptions is that individuals didn't receive additional income from scholarships or clinical work while training. There are a number of additional scholarship opportunities, including those offered by the Foundation for Physical Therapy, as well as APTA sections and other foundations to supplement training costs. So we took these short-term earning values during that training period, as well as expected future academic career earnings, and examined the cost benefit of pursuing PhD training relative to a career as a clinical PT or non-PhD academic over a 30-year period of time. I want to thank Sherry Ledoux for her help with this analysis, as well as Alex Garbin, who has been instrumental in helping put together the final stages of this analysis. We adjusted the earnings, in particular, the differences to present value to represent that greater early clinical PT career earnings are more valuable. They're more valuable due to potential investments compounding over time. And so these data were generated using 2019 CAPTI survey data on salaries for academics, as well as surveys sent to PT department and program directors to determine timeframes for promotion for various tracks. We also used an APTA median income report and extrapolated 2019 clinical salaries. The data presented here are total compensation, which is salary plus benefits. And again, they assume no supplemental income during the training periods. This figure illustrates annual total compensation for the groups of clinical PT in purple, academic non-PhD PT, so someone working in an academic institution without a PhD with a PT degree in green, academic PhD trained PT in blue, and an academic PhD trained PT with time spent in majority scholarship, which is pink. Total compensation is shown over a 30-year period following the receipt of a DPT degree. They include periods of academic promotion, which were determined via program director survey. And the results detail that PhD-trained groups experience reduced total compensation during their PhD training in these first 4 years compared to their non-PhD counterparts. Additionally, while there's an increase in total compensation during postdoctoral training for the majority PhD scholarship group, it remains lower than the total compensation for the non-majority scholarship PhD group. However, although there's this reduced short-term earning potential for both of the PhD groups, their total compensation exceeds that of the non-PhD group after training. So you can see that here at the level of assistant professor compared to the purple and the green lines, and the green line in particular. And what you see over time is with each rank promotion, the difference in total compensation between PhD and non-PhD groups grows larger, with increases in total compensation occurring for the PhD group involved in majority scholarship. So many people ask, what's the break-even point? Again, all of these data and these assumptions are based on the fact that no additional income was earned during that PhD and postdoctoral training period. This figure provides additional insight into the differences in total compensation between both types of PhD groups. So the PhD with majority scholarship and the PhD without, compared to the clinical PT group. Specifically, over 4 years of PhD training, both groups have $250,000 less total compensation. For the majority scholarship PhD training group, the relative loss in total compensation will have increased to $355,000 by the end of postdoctoral training. Despite the reduced short-term earning potential, the increased total compensation after PhD training results in the non-majority scholarship PhD group in blue breaking even, which means no net loss or gain, at the 16-year time point, which is 12 years after initiating PhD training, or after completing PhD training. And this is relative to the clinical PT group. The majority scholarship PhD group breaks even at year 19, which is 13 years after postdoctoral training in pink. And again, this is relative to the clinical PT group. Both PhD groups also experience substantially greater long-term earning potential over the 30-year period relative to the clinical group over the same period. So when we compare PhD to clinical, we see an $807,000 greater earning potential. And then when we look at the majority scholarship PhD, we see over $1 million in additional earning potential. So again, these figures illustrate that there is an investment, there is a loss early on, but that you're able to recoup that loss over time. Now, there are other ways that you can mitigate some of those losses. And one way is through a loan repayment grant. And this particular program is intended for applicants with rigorous research training, but it's an opportunity to pay off 100% of your federal student loans, both undergraduate and graduate. And the key is not to consolidate your loans so that you're eligible for this program. You can find more information on their website. There's also a public service loan forgiveness program, which requires 10 years of employment in certain institutions that meet certain criteria. So those are both really great ways to additionally offset the potential deficits in earning potential during that training period and recoup the benefit financially of the investment in PhD training. There are, of course, additional financial opportunities to narrow the gap. So as a faculty member, many individuals have additional consulting opportunities or patents and royalties, or even paid travel opportunities, both national and international, or paid editorial board memberships, or continuing education opportunities. Your visibility as a faculty member leads to many more such opportunities than might otherwise be possible in a clinical setting. But certainly finances are not the only thing that should be considered when making a decision about PhD training. The reason I present the financial information is merely to illustrate that the finances maybe shouldn't prevent someone from getting a PhD as much as we might have thought. More importantly, an emphasis on the other meaningful aspects of having a PhD are presented here, including the tremendous impact on advancing and sustaining our profession. That's done through research and through teaching. There's just such a wonderful opportunity to truly mold the future of the profession by having a PhD. There's an intellectual stretching and challenge that I love and enjoy with everything that I do. In other words, there's never a dull moment. There's always new growth opportunities and really wonderful ways in which I can continue to develop new skills and stimulate my mind and concurrently be contributing to our profession. So what are the characteristics of a successful PhD candidate? While perseverance and tenacity are really important, there's often uncertainty. These particular characteristics are important to make sure that someone is going to be able to face that uncertainty or the rejection or the frustration that comes with getting a PhD. You have to be willing to keep moving forward. There are tons of rewards, but there are also obstacles, and you have to be willing to push through those. The next one is cogency, which is another important characteristic. You have to be able to clearly articulate your ideas in person and in writing. The next one is self-discipline. So setting priorities and optimizing time management are really important. You're not given a structured schedule, and you have to kind of create your own schedule and your own time frame for finishing tasks throughout your PhD training. And the last one is curiosity. Individuals should have a natural inquisitiveness that drives their interest in research. If you want a list of PhD programs throughout the country, there's a wonderful website through the APTA that lists every program. The program that I'm most familiar with is the Rehab Science PhD program at the University of Colorado, but there's quite a wealth of programs available and out there. So what should you look for in a PhD program? Well, the research areas should definitely match your interests. However, the research process may be more important than the specifics of what your mentor is researching. In other words, you have to have a match of some sort, but it doesn't have to be a perfect match. The purpose of the training is to develop skills in how to go about the process of conducting research so that you can then apply that to any patient population down the road. So identifying a good mentor that has an environment in which you can learn and grow is far more important than the specific line of research that they may be conducting or the specific patient population that they may be working with. Another consideration is to avoid programs with excessive coursework if you are fatigued by the coursework that you may have already experienced with your undergraduate and your DPT degrees. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, our program at the University of Colorado, for example, has 30 credit hours of coursework with 30 additional credit hours of dissertation work that's applied and hands-on work. And even of that 30 hours of coursework, some of it is also very applied. So that's far less than many programs and allows students to really focus on the applied hands-on training as opposed to a lot of classroom training. However, if you're interested in more coursework and more classroom type of training, there are certainly programs to meet that interest as well. It's also important to look for a program with a history of students getting funded. Look to see whether students have a foundation for physical therapy funding track record or APTA section awards or awards from the National Institutes of Health. And look for a program at an institution that's large enough to support a variety of collaborations. For example, I had a student that came in who was interested in muscle physiology, but expanded her interest to focus more on implementation dissemination science during the course of her PhD training. These are very different areas, but being in an institution and a lab environment where there's room for growth helps allow students to adapt and grow throughout the training experience and consider new opportunities and new training experiences. And then finally, you do want teaching experience. So look for a program that at least gives you some of the skills for setting the stage for you to be an effective educator in future DPT programs. So what should you look for in a PhD program when you consider full-time versus part-time? And what are the benefits of full-time versus part-time? Well, full-time allows you to finish sooner. It's typically a faster track, As I mentioned earlier, it allows for paid tuition and health insurance. And it usually allows for more productivity in terms of publications and grants because you are immersed in that environment. That allows you to be more competitive for scholarships and things like loan repayment grant funding. But part-time is a good option for many individuals. It allows you to work clinically while completing your PhD. It often does not include paid tuition and health insurance benefits, and it may not make you as competitive for some of these scholarships and funding opportunities. The other thing I'll mention with part-time programs that I've noticed is individuals tend to be a little bit more isolated. They tend to be working on their dissertation work in isolation as opposed to full-time programs where students are fully immersed with other full-time students and learn from each other on a day-to-day basis. So what to look for in a PhD mentor? Well, the mentoring experience is a really important part of the process. And so making sure you have a mentor that's really invested in creating a good learning experience is essential. The productivity of the mentor is also really important. So look at the publication record. What their publication record is now is likely to translate into what your future productivity is going to look like. The mentor's grant funding is also an important piece. Are you going to have the resources you want in order to ask the questions that you want to ask? Are you going to have the resources to go to conferences and network with people? And then the track record for getting PhD students funded is very important. So if the students are getting funded, in many cases, like our students are able to get funded and add to their base stipend what we provide. So in other words, we provide that base stipend of $34,000 and they get additional funding that helps improve their circumstances in terms of cost of living and everything and reduce that debt piece. And so track record of students getting funded is an indication of opportunities for you as a future student to also be funded similarly. And then make sure the person's mentoring style matches your work and learning styles. So if you really want a hands-on experience versus a hands-off experience, you want to explore that carefully and make sure it's a good match with your mentor. And check to see that the history of graduates getting desired jobs upon graduation is there, because that's an important part of your future opportunities. So what's the best way to prepare for PhD training? Well, one of the most important factors that we encourage everyone to consider is getting involved in some aspect of research just to test the waters. See if it's for you. See if it's something that engages you. If you're passionate about asking questions and you're curious, then this is the way to really test the waters and see if this is the right road for you. Visit the research labs, talk with the mentors, talk with the mentees. Make sure you get a feel for what the environment looks like and is like, and what the pros and the cons are from the students' perspectives as well as the mentors' perspectives. So one of the things that I'm often asked is whether or not individuals should go through PhD training immediately upon completing their DPT training. And this is certainly a debatable topic, and you'll hear lots of different perspectives. So obviously there's two routes, right? So direct from DPT to PhD and finishing your DPT, going out working clinically for a few years and then pursuing your PhD. And how long is optimal to be engaged in clinical practice before going back to your PhD? I'll be the first to tell you that in an ideal world, I think everyone should have a couple years of clinical experience before they pursue their PhD. However, you don't need 10 years of experience. You may not even need 5 years. You need enough to understand how to ask clinical questions. And from there, you can partner with high-level clinicians who may not have that research background, but have a lot of curiosity and want to change clinical practice. You have the research skills, they have the clinical skills. It's a perfect match. And there are lots of clinicians out there that are eager to get involved on that level. I'll also be the first to tell you that when people go out and work clinically, they often don't come back to get their PhD. Life happens. Life circumstances may prevent someone who now has a mortgage on a house from going back and pursuing that PhD. And so that direct DPT to PhD route is a very viable option. In fact, I'm seeing more and more students choose a route of that nature. Or again, a route with a very short period of time with clinical exposure with a clear intent to go back to get that PhD. When clinicians who are out working 10 years go back and get their PhD, they often struggle coming back into academia. The world is different. It's a different mindset. And they've been out for so long, they have this wonderful wealth of clinical experience, but then it's harder to jump into that academic mode. And so that's why I personally advocate for a faster transition. I went directly from my MPT to my PhD, and I don't feel it slowed me down. I did get clinical experience along the way in different ways through clinical research and through other opportunities. But the direct route worked very well for me, and currently run a rehab program, research program that includes a lot of different patient populations, a lot of different clinically relevant questions. And so I think the DPT to PhD track can be a very viable option. So hopefully I've touched on some of the key considerations that you might think about if you're interested in getting a PhD. The financial piece, in terms of hopefully not being as big of a barrier as you might have thought. The school fatigue piece. My recommendation is certainly take a year or two off after you finish your DPT training, but don't take 10 years off if you can avoid it. Simply because if you don't have loans, why not go back and have those loans repaid while they're still in existence and get the best of both worlds? I also think you can incorporate clinical practice into clinical research and PhD training. So that shouldn't necessarily be a barrier. You can still have that clinical connectedness. And balance is possible with PhD training and in academia. Most of our students state that they're passionate about what they do. They love what they do. And again, like I said earlier, it doesn't feel quite as much like work. It feels more like they're contributing to their future growth and opportunities for further advancement down the road. It's an incredibly rewarding opportunity to be in an academic setting. There's so many wonderful challenges, opportunities, tremendous colleagues, growth opportunities that are truly endless. So thank you for taking the time to join me today. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mike Body, who's going to provide information on residency and fellowship training. But should you have additional questions about our Rehab Science PhD program at the University of Colorado or PhD training in general, feel free to contact me. We also have a recording of a version of this presentation available to refer back to down the road through the CSM platform or on our website, www.rehabsciencephd.com, that you can share with your colleagues. Thank you very much.